Rise and shine, YouTube. Today we got another review for you. We got the Gravis and Axes from Teevolution. These are their first two pads and the start of their Genesis lineup. Genesis means creation, and their very first start, their very two creations in their pad lineup. And I actually think they did a damn good job on what they actually wanted to produce out of these mouse pads, except for one part. Right, we'll talk about that a little later. But these pads come in at 450 by 400 millimeters. They come in at 5 millimeters thick. Even though these pads don't really feel like super thick pads, right? It's very odd, but the base, the firmness, everything about these pads are actually very, very good. When it comes down to the surfaces, they have their very own unique surfaces between the two, which will give you completely different style of gameplay and feel and speed and control between the two. We'll talk about it. The stitching on these guys are actually very good. It's below the surface stitching. You don't feel it on your skin at all ever throughout the course of gaming, and it's something to be appreciated of, because I hate like stitching that is above the surface that you can feel, because I do have my forearm on my mouse pads, and I do kind of move it around. So if I do feel that stitching underneath, and if it's a little sharp, it's very, very uncomfortable. So stitching is amazing. The surface between the two do the job and what they want to do. Sizing, they are 450 by 400, like I said. I think they could have, I know they could have went larger, right? I feel like the sizing of this pad is going to be the downfall on whether or not somebody purchases it or not. But we're going to talk about everything, because I still think that these pads are pretty good. And while the price point might not be the best, we're still going to talk about it. So we're going to start with the Axis. We're going to use the Gravis here, though, for the base purposes, and we'll talk about the surface here a little later. But the base is a silicone base, and it's very sticky. Like, this is probably the stickiest base I've ever used. It doesn't move on your desk at all, and it's something that I like, because I don't like when pads move. There's some pads that are worth $60 that move on your desk, and I just don't understand. So, no moving on the base or on your desk. Feels phenomenal. And the firmness of these pads, right? There is a little bit of difference in the surface base kind of firmness feel between the two of them, but we'll use kind of like a pen here to start, right? It's very, very like firm. You gotta press down a little bit onto them, but when you press down on these pads, it kind of like almost balances out, right? Like, especially under like skates, it doesn't really sink down to a certain point, but it kind of just lowers altogether in a certain area. And when you use dots and stuff like that, it's almost like a memory foam, where you press down, you don't really get a lot of you don't sink in a lot, which is fantastic, because these are firm. Well, my Axis is very firm, and it's not a hard pad, it's not a soft. It's definitely it's very firm. It's a very firm cloth pad base, and it's phenomenal. Pressing down with dots, I don't sink in unless I press down a little harder. But with my normal use, right, I can sink down a little bit on the Akitsu, right? But I also think the base just doesn't help it either. But when it comes down to, just standard skates, these are the Cairo skates. No feeling of sinking down, obviously, but it's still very, very consistent. And with a little more skates on the bottom of your mouse for the 2C, very, very consistent. There are a little bit of base scraping between direction changes, when you kind of have a different little bit of weight pushed down on your mouse depending on which direction you're going and what part of your hand you're using. Well, for me, I don't like fingertip mice. I'm basically relaxed claw, palm, I have my whole hand on the mouse, and that's why I can't use soft or X soft, because I just have a heavy hand. So I appreciate these bases being very firm, because I don't have any issues with these pads in game. I don't feel any sinking down. I don't have any issues. But also, when I do get heavy-handed, these pads are very consistent, right? I can say a little bit of difference on the Gravis, though, because the surface on that we'll talk about. But the Axis does exactly what Teevolution wanted to do. Derives from the X and Y axis. That's why it's called Axis. But it gives you that perfect balance between speed and control. A little bit of a backstory between both of these pads before we go any further, right? These pads really have been in development for about 6+ months, right? I'll even kind of show you here as well. Show you a little bit of them here. These 6 months worth, this is a media kit, you know, obviously, but 6 months plus of development, right? From the base to the surface to the stitching, everything that is these pads, the Teevolution team really knocked it out of the park. When it comes down to the surfaces, right? You got the Gravis. So this will be hopefully what the new design is going to be, and it's going to be much better than what we have now because they are raised above the surface. So that's good. But you got a little description, right? Named after the X and Y axis, symbol of balance and motion direction. But they do that, right? The perfect harmony between speed and accuracy. And the Gravis is mud, mud, mud. Slow, slow, slow. Comes from the name from gravity, right? And we'll talk about there in a second. But overall, where's my mouse? Oh, it's over here. Okay, there we go. Overall, their descriptions on their pads meet the performance of these pads. And that's what I like, right? With the return from Midori, the description of it, calling it a firm pad, but receiving it and it's a soft X soft pad, really destroys that kind of experience for me because it was nothing like what I expect. If I read the description of the Teevolution and getting these before, release, I will say that the description on these are the closest description I've ever seen on a mouse pad, and I appreciate that. Even some eSport Tiger pads have me question like how they kind of get the speed of them because sometimes they feel faster or slower or something like that. The Axis does it perfectly. Great balance between the speed and control. X and Y is perfectly balanced. The texture surface on this under the skin is a nice refined, very, very, very fine texture where it feels pretty much smooth under the arm, but under your fingertips, you do get more of a texture to it. Under your hand, you get a more texture to it. But while your arm is on it, like mine, forearm, you don't really feel that same texture. It's very weird. On certain skates, you'll get a little more texture. Like the Silver Fox, you get more texture to them. The Cairo skates, you get more texture to the bottom. But with something like the RS Speeds, you get a different kind of like smooth feeling pad. So with the Axis, you get that perfect balance between X and Y. You get that perfect balance between speed and control. And if you want a good not control, but if you want a good balance pad, Teevolution knocked it out of the park with the service. Like if you're in that realm of balance pads, I would recommend this pad. For the price point, it's a little different, but we'll talk about that after the Gravis. But I actually find that this surface would be good, right? They definitely made something good here with their Axis pad. Their Gravis is a very, very different pad, though. And, well, let's talk about it. The Gravis on the other side is very, and I mean very slow. And it has a unique feel to it even on the skin, it's one of the more unique feeling surfaces I use. You can already see that it picks up your finger prints on it, but that doesn't change the feel of it. Now, wiping this off with a cloth doesn't actually work because the texture just sucks everything in. You can wipe it away with your fingers, but that's about it. But this pad is slow. This is probably the muddiest most control surface I've ever used, but it also has a very, very unique feel to it on the skin, where it's like a satin plush smooth surface to it. It's I haven't felt a surface like this. Like out of all the mouse pads I've personally used, I haven't used every single mouse pad on the market, but this is very unique to me. It's very, very, very slow, and it gets even slower with just pressure put down on it too. But this one also is more of a soft pad, right? Where the firmness is not as firm as the Axis. And I think that's just because of the surface itself. It's still pretty firm, but you can definitely press in a little more. And I can definitely get the bottoms of my mouse or my mice to kind of scrape a lot easier, especially with direction changes. But it's still weirdly slowly consistent. It's like I said, it's a very unique pad. It's like a satin, plushy, carpety feel, like all put into one. The base, like I said, is like a softer firm to it, right? Definitely sinks down more than the Axis. But when it comes to the speed, it's completely different. It's on the other side of the spectrum, where when they say gravity, they really mean gravity. Still has the same base, the same stitching, but with light pressure, right? You can get it to go a little bit, right? It feels weird under certain skates, but once you press down, that's when the gravity takes control, and that's why I don't really like this pad. I'm not a control guy at all, right? I'll use balance pads, I'll use them all day long, but you'll probably never see me main a control pad because I have heavy hands when I use mice. I use my whole hand on the mouse, and I tend to push down more on every single pad that I have. That's why I mained glass pads for the longest time. I have been experimenting more with cloth. We'll go about that later on. But it's slow, right? This is muddy. This is the muddiest of mud pads, and they do what they say they wanted to do, right? They wanted gravity, they wanted control, they wanted deliberate movements under your mouse. And honestly, I think this pad is more consistent with larger skates. Very, very odd to say that. But the Cairo skates feel more consistent with pressure on it than dots do. But if you do want something very slow, get the Gravis, right? So, and it's very tuggy. It's very tuggy, very muddy, very slow. Not the pad for me, but if you like that, go for it. This is primarily made for tack shooters, 100%. I would not use this in fast-paced shooters because you're just going to fight against the pad the entire time. But lastly, let's talk about the dimensions to the price point. Now, this is where I don't really agree on these pads themselves, because when you see the price, right? Oh, $39.80. Crazy, right? That's pretty good, right? But once you add it to cart, right? And you see the shipping being $16.90. I'm obviously not showing my other screen for purposes, but this brings the pad from $39.80 to $56.70. Honestly, I can't justify that price for these pads because of the sizing, right? I can't justify a 450 by 400 millimeter pad to you guys that comes in at $60. I just can't do it, right? You can get an XL artisan pad for pretty much only about $10 to $12 more expensive off of Artisan's website and get a larger pad versus a much smaller in width. And if you have a very low sense, I mean, one, this isn't the final design, but if this was the final design, these are slightly raised, and you will feel it under your skates. So I feel like these pads should have at least been 490 by 420 at the least, right? And they could have kept that $56 price point, because there are other just random pads hitting the market that are $60, right? But they're larger pads and the price is more justifiable, even though they're probably just basic pads, right? These still have a better premium feel than something of like that as Esport Tiger. But I just can't, like the Esport Tiger basic pads, like the I'll show you. We've also been trying these out, right? The Yashang V2 and the Kusing, however you say it, the V3 for the special edition. This guy here. I've been trying these pads out the last 2 days as well. But the premiumness of the Teevolution pads, it does feel more premium than the Esport Tiger pads. But I just can't justify the 450 by 400 millimeter sizing on these pads. Now, the 5 millimeter, thickness, I mean, isn't bad. You don't really notice that it's that thick, right? I don't know. I wish that these pads were larger. I wish they say that they're going to, depending on this release, they'll think about releasing larger sizes. But I think that should have been flipped. I think they should have released larger sizes first, because that is the primary target for pretty much everybody in the scene. And it just fits a wider array of sensitivities and everything else as well. But all in all, I think Teevolution kind of knocked it out of the park with these pads. If the pads were larger, like I said, they would be more justifiable for the price point. But that's it. You got 2 solid launches, new launches under Teevolution. I'm appreciative of them for, bringing them out or sending them out to me. We got the review out on them. I like them. I don't like the Gravis. It's very, really, really slow, but I'll be using the Axis here in a little bit. But love you guys. Rise up. God bless. And we'll see you for the next review.